in the Naked Coach Collective podcast.
And welcome, listeners, to another episode of the Naked Coach Collective. And you've got a treat tonight. You've got three of us tonight. I'm here, I'm B, and we've got D, and we've got Ian. And tonight we're doing sort of like a follow-up episode to one that we did a couple of weeks ago. And it's all about growth mindset. How you go from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset and the action plans you can use to get there. And first up tonight, Ian's going to share something with us that Dee and I know nothing about, and so we're as interested to learn this as you are. So take it away, Ian.
Thank you, B. Take two. I just went through our list for your listeners. I just went through our list for about 10 minutes and realised we weren't recording, so take two it is. So, as B mentioned, we've kind of covered off what a growth mindset is and what fixed mindset is, and all the benefits, etc., to that in our previous episode. So we wanted to kind of give people some action steps and tools that they can use moving forward to go from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And so two tools that I use with my clients is a growth mindset chart and a float model, not to be confused with something else. So the growth mindset chart is essentially you want to get yourself a piece of paper and a pen and create 5 columns, and along the top, as the title for each column is fixed mindset thoughts, fixed mindset pattern, growth mindset pattern, shift questions, growth mindset thoughts. And whenever you're in a situation where you feel you're struggling and you notice that you're saying things in your head, as I did or do quite a bit, I tend to call myself an idiot in certain situations. When something goes wrong, that is my fault. I go, such an idiot here. And so that's a fixed mindset thought. So it's stuff like that. So for me, I'm such an idiot, or it could be, well, other people can do this. Why can't I do it? So there's lots of different thoughts. You want to try and catch what those thoughts are and make a note of them. And then you want to understand what kind of fixed mindset pattern that thought lines up with. So is it, for me, self-judgment? Are you comparing yourself to other people? Unfairly as well, because they may be well ahead of you in their knowledge of the situation. Are you making a mountain out of a molehill? So are you turning a slight mistake into a disaster in your head? And then you want to get to a point where you're figuring out what the growth mindset pattern is that you kind of need to move towards. So you want to be able to analyze any lessons learned from the situation, understand that mistakes are opportunities to learn and grow, constructive comparison, I'll come on to that as well. So there's loads of different kind of growth mindset patterns that you can start to recognize and gravitate towards as well. And what you need to do after you've kind of filled in those 3 columns is look at shift questions. So what questions can I ask myself to shift from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset? So how do I move forward to what I value, or how do I move forward to complete this task? What can I do differently in this situation in the future if it comes up again? Those are the kind of shift questions that we need to ask ourselves, and then we move into the kind of growth mindset thoughts then. So, okay, I could go to my mentor and ask them for their advice and help as to how they handle that situation and how I could handle that situation moving forward if it comes up again. That kind of thing. I'm not here to compete with anyone. I'm just here to complete this particular task. Why am I comparing myself to that person when there's no need to? So that's the kind of growth mindset chart. And a specific situation for me as a young junior kind of project manager, when I was first starting out in the role, I was in a meeting, one of my very first projects. Bearing in mind I'd never run a meeting before, and then I'm sat there with directors and owners of a business, and as all projects do, they get issues, and we had some particular issues which were causing kind of delays, and which meant we had to push back the go live of this particular project, which was not on for the customer because they had hard deadlines that they needed to hit. And so they were understandably very angry at the situation that we were in. I didn't know how to handle that conversation, that meeting with the customer. I'd never been in that kind of situation before previously, because I was obviously a junior member of staff. As a project coordinator, you don't really get involved in those conversations. That's more for a project manager, which I now was. So this was kind of like right in at the deep end, so to speak. And so, example for myself in that situation was, I'm such an idiot. I should know this. Why do I not know this? All that kind of stuff, right? So the pattern to that is self-judgment. The pattern, the growth mindset pattern I wanted to get to was, okay, what can I learn from this situation moving forward so that it doesn't happen again? What mistakes have I made that led to this situation so it doesn't happen again? Sorry, those are the shift questions that I wanted to ask myself. The growth mindset pattern are the mistakes or opportunities to learn and grow and analyze lessons learned. So those are the growth mindset patterns. And then those shift questions is, how can I move forward, etc. And then the growth mindset thought is, okay, I need to obviously have a conversation with my mentor, who was my manager at the time, and understand what he would have done in this situation, what he would have done in the lead up to ensure that this situation didn't occur, and how can I take that and move forward with it, and also just what do I genuinely just do now and moving forward? How can I pull back this situation so that the customer's happy and the project can move forward again? At the time, I did not do any of that. I just sat there and was like, oh my God, this is a disaster.
Hindsight is such a wonderful thing, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's a really good model to use. Really good to ask yourselves those questions, absolutely, because how often do we actually recognize the things that we're saying to ourselves, like, oh, I'm an idiot, or, we often, unless you actually ask yourselves the questions why and how and all those questions you just mentioned, often we can't move forward. My sort of one thought before you go on to the second model, really about growth mindset, is I was thinking about this today. I was thinking about the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. And absolutely, we can become a growth mindset from a fixed mindset. I think all three of us are living proof of that here. Because at points in our lives before we became coaches, we've definitely had fixed mindset probably around things. And we've probably become much more open having become coaches around lots of situations. But the one thing I was thinking about today is, just because you go from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, it doesn't mean that that growth mindset applies to every area of your life. So you might be really good at having a growth mindset in terms of career and learning, but you might not be so good with the growth mindset about your personal life, let's say. Okay? Because I think there is this thing that if you've got a growth mindset, you apply that to every area of your life. And of course, that is the ideal. But we also come up against fears. And sometimes in parts of our life, whether it be career, personal, money, it could be any parts of our lives, there might be a fear around doing something, and we might not be able to adopt that growth mindset very quickly in that area of our life. But we might be able to adopt it really quickly in another area of our life. Am I making sense? So it's just like, it's not, I feel like what I'm trying to say to listeners is, it's not always a case of going from a fixed mindset straight into a growth mindset when you learn how in every area of your life. And maybe the best place to start is the place that you're more willing to grow in your life first. Because if you see that you can build a growth mindset around that place in your life where you want to grow, where you've got an feeling that you want to grow, but you're just a little bit stuck. If you do that first and you realize the benefits that come with it, you're more likely then to adopt that growth mindset into the other areas of your life. So that's what I was thinking about today. It's not always we're here in a fixed mindset, do this action plan, and then you'll be in a growth mindset for every part of your life. I don't think it works like that, if I'm being totally honest, because I think some parts of our lives are easier to grow in than other parts. Okay? And so that was just my thought around it. And that's really sort of one of the thoughts I was just thinking about from a slightly different perspective of from a fixed line to growth mindset. I don't know whether Dee wants to interject before Ian goes on to the next model, or... Yeah, I mean, just what you said, absolutely. I don't think it's possible at all to say, right, I now have a growth mindset. I've done the work, and that to apply to every part of your life. I just don't think that's possible because, some areas will need more work than others. Other areas, you could be totally satisfied out of 10 in a certain area of your life and be happy with that.
Yeah.
And it may even be considered a fixed mindset because you are actually happy at that point. So I don't think that's necessary. So it's a very valid point you made there, that you just need to work on certain areas as they come up. And I'm all about working with and prioritizing and compartmentalizing life in certain ways. I think also going to what Ian was saying about having that sort of, I don't think you called it a program. Did you call it a program? And the 5 stages?
No, it's it's essentially the growth mindset chart.
It's a chart, right? Okay. So, see, for me, I sort of think, your growth mindset starts from a belief. So it's either you have a limiting belief, or you have an empowering belief, you have a growth belief, you have some sort of a belief, and it could be as simple as I can never drive a car, say, for example. So if you feel that way about it, and then a friend offers to take you out driving, you're likely to say no. So you're going to give up the opportunities to practice. So you're not going to grow because you're not going to practice. Whereas if where you start from a place of self-belief, okay, I don't know how to drive yet, or I'm working on it, then your growth is going to accelerate because it's starting from a place of belief. So in Ian's example, for example, where he was working and it was Ian, give yourself a break. It was the first time you had this responsibility, I imagine, from what you say,
It was. Well, that's the thing. That's the thing at the time. I didn't think that, but now I'm like, Jesus Christ, I never would have been able to handle that situation at the time. I wouldn't expect myself to be able to.
No, exactly. And then, but somehow, you must have practiced. You developed a belief that you could do it, and you practiced, and it's the rest is history, as they say. I imagine.
As they say.
So what I'm saying is, along with that growth chart, that your own level of belief in yourself is a vital component.
Well, that's it. That's that fixed mindset thought, that initial thought in your head, to that growth mindset thought at the end of that chart. And I think Pete, you really raised an important point there. This is not just a kind of light switch.
No.
This is a practice that you need to put in place over and over and over and get pretty much exactly the same as my situation of that meeting where I'm in those meetings not being able to handle it the first time, whereas now I can quite happily sit in front of whoever and tell them if they need to pipe down. And I know how to handle that situation and make sure we get to the resolution, or at least understand that we're moving towards a resolution and all that kind of thing. So, you learn by practicing, and you get confident by practicing as well.
Would you incorporate a level of visualization or a level of putting yourself, living in that person, in living in the you of the future, if you like?
I suppose it depends on what this particular situation was as well. And if after you've asked the shift question and you come into the growth mindset thought, you're kind of putting yourself into that, well, what do I need to do, or who do I need to become to make sure that situation, whatever it is dealt with better. So you may be kind of putting that visualization aspect in there. I suppose that's maybe like an additional tool that you can throw into it as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Interested to find out what the other model is that you spoke about, Ian, which was the float model.
Yeah, so that first one was all around the thoughts and our mind, and this float model is more for our feelings and emotions.
Okay.
And so the acronym is for feel the change, in your emotions in whatever situation you're in at that particular time. So feel that change and understand that there's a change in your emotions at that particular moment.
Okay.
Label that emotion. So is it frustration? Are you irritated? Are you angry? Whatever that emotion is, label it and then always observe it. So recognize it as a natural consequence of having that kind of fixed mindset for this particular type of situation. As you say, you might not have a fixed mindset for all situations. It could be just certain scenarios where you do have that fixed mindset. So just observe it and recognize that emotion as a natural consequence of that fixed mindset in that situation, and then accept it. Accept that emotion without any judgment. It is a natural reaction, and as such is to be expected. So kind of what we were just talking about then with my situation of not being able to handle that meeting properly. I was calling myself an idiot, but I was also feeling quite anxious at the time because, you got business owners and directors, etc., shouting at you, which is always fun. Now it's fun, but at the time when you're very first starting out, you're like, oh my God, this is awful. Feel really anxious at that particular moment in time.
Yeah.
But that's to be expected because I've never been in that situation before, right? And had no idea how to handle that situation previously. What I didn't do, which is the next part of that float model, which is take the growth mindset action step despite the emotion.
Yeah.
So, and in certain situations, you're not going to know what that next step is, but you can kind of understand what a growth mindset would, action step would lead you to do, as in essentially look back at that growth mindset chart and ask yourself those kind of shift questions. How do I move forward?
Yeah.
And so you can get to that kind of growth mindset action step by doing that and take it despite those emotions that you're feeling at the time. But once you've gone through feeling that emotional change, labeling it for what it is, observing it and recognizing that it's a natural consequence of your mindset currently, and then accepting it without any kind of judgment, and that it's just a natural reaction and is to be expected, you're much more likely to be able to come to what that next growth mindset action step is in that moment in time. Now, again, I didn't do any of that. I was just like, oh my God, this is awful.
So do you
Well,
do that
that's
now?
the kind of float model as well, which is more based around the emotions of yourself in that situation at the time.
Yeah. So do you find that do you do these sorts of things automatically now if you're trying to learn something new or develop a part of you, or are you more rigid and think about each step?
So I'd never heard of growth mindset until I really got into coaching. So I didn't have a clue what it was. I didn't know any tools or techniques. So I was just kind of naturally inclined towards a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset in, I would say, most situations. And in that particular situation, at that very moment in time, I completely had a fixed mindset. However, after that call had finished, I then relaxed a bit and then thought, right, okay, what can I do to make sure this doesn't happen again? But for people who don't think like that initially, it's going to take time and it's going to take that practice that we were talking about. And you're going to have to repeat the process over and over and over again until it becomes almost second nature. So you don't have to think about it. You just naturally do it. Like now, if I was on a call that was as bad as that, I know how to handle it. I know what questions to ask myself whilst they're whittering on and shouting at me, get to a resolution. I know what to do in that situation. So it becomes kind of second nature.
Yeah.
But it takes time. It takes time. It's not a flick of the switch.
And like you say, I think if you're those charts, either of them really, and it depends, I think, what resonates with you more, whether you're more emotionally led or whether you're more thought, we are all different the way we think, is really good for deep ingrained set mindsets that you really need to shift, so that you need to spend more time thinking about them and more time analyzing them. I think the other part about going from a singular mindset to a growth mindset, for me, what I try and do when I'm coaching is, if I find if I see, so we're very good at recognizing patterns in people, aren't we? About what they say, how they talk, and there are patterns of words that people use regularly, like you, Ian. You said you're saying to yourself, "I'm an idiot." Okay,
Mhm.
and there's like, and we recognize it as coaches, but you don't necessarily recognize that yourself. Okay, and I think when I recognize that in a person, we'll have a little discussion around, do you realize how often you say, like, let's take me and Ian, for example, okay? When we first started coaching together, and when Ian first started coaching me, he used to say to me, will you stop saying sorry? Right? I got this. I did, didn't I, Ian?
Stop
I
it.
used to say sorry about absolutely everything, okay? Never even realized I did it, okay? And actually, I was saying sorry for things that I didn't even need to be sorry about, okay? And that sorry word, actually, for me, is like a guilty word. So when I say sorry, I feel better because I don't feel guilty. Is that making sense? So I am now well aware of that word. So what I try and do with my clients to give them quick shifts, if it's deeply ingrained, you've got to do what Ian's done, the charts and everything. You've got to analyze it. You've got to work through it. But if they're using, so like I use the word sorry, I'd say to them, do you realize how often you use this word or this phrase? And most often they'll say, no, didn't even know I did it. So what does that mean to you? What is that bringing up? Okay. And then I might say to them, right, for every time you use that word, what's the shift? So how can you change it slightly? Yeah. To be more grow mindset. And so what I've done is I've implanted in their brain, and I know this sounds awful, but I implanted it in mine. Actually, Ian, you did it without me realizing. Please stop saying sorry. You don't need to keep saying sorry. So now I think about it when I say it. And I'm like, do I need to be saying sorry? Is this a situation? Because if I don't, then actually I don't need to just stop that, okay? And I think that's just quite a nice quick fix to stop sort of words that are keeping you in a fixed mindset, to just change the word. And it only has to be changed slightly to become a growth mindset word, doesn't it? Or the sentence, just very slightly. And it gives people awareness very quickly without having to write, analyze or anything. It's just an awareness thing. But I don't know if anybody else does that, but I do that. What on earth is that?
I do that.
No, don't you start
Literally
me on another
do's.
one. But I don't know if anybody else does that, but that's just like a quick sort of analytical thing that you can do.
I've done the same. I've done the clients in the past where they've said awful things about themselves and just made them change it into something, encouraged them to change it to something of their own choosing. And even if it doesn't change the way they feel immediately, it starts to chip away at negativity. And every time they want to say that, they'll stop and think, okay, so what can I say instead? Or should I just not say anything? If you think of anything to replace it with at the time, just stop and just stop yourself saying those things. Because I'm a firm believer as well that I think that we are a holistic thing, a holistic being, and all of our cells and everything hears everything you say. So if you're constantly saying I'm an idiot, and you're just going to start behaving and believing that. So it's really important to not say these things out loud.
No, you're absolutely right, because you're feeding into what we call the subconscious, aren't you? That's how we've grown our negative beliefs, is we've fed that into our subconscious. And so essentially, like what you were saying, Dee, we're undoing that negative belief to come out of that fixed mindset to go into the growth mindset. And so, I think there's lots of things you can do. But I think, like I said, the two models that you've had for really deep ingrained beliefs that need to be analysed, they're really good, really strong. And like I said, depending on who you are, depends on which maybe model you use. Or you could use both. You could try both, see what works best, what fits best, what changes that fixed mindset to a growth mindset quicker, maybe. But like I said, sometimes I just like a quick sort of like get people to quickly recognise that short bit that they use a lot, or that one word that they use a lot, and why are they using it? What is it sort of benefit? What's the benefit? What's the downside? That kind of thing. But just, recognising it themselves when they're saying it. And like I said, when Ian said that to me, I was like, my God, I didn't realise I said it so much.
If I had a drink every time you said sorry on just one call, I'd have been absolutely off my tits.
Why do you think I've got a pint of vodka? No, it's water.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Well, I think
I think-
that's a really interesting session, actually, because we've all come at it from different angles. You know,
Yeah.
there's like action plans. Those two, you know, really, really good, Ian. New ones that I hadn't heard of, and I think Dee will say the same.
I like it.
Yeah, and stuff that we've talked about that are maybe a little bit quicker fixes for some of the short, you know, for little bits we're doing. So, any other information to impart on that growth mindset? Any like nuggets of wisdom or?
I did sort of make a few notes on just on focus. So, yeah, you might feel stuck and you might want and maybe a quicker fix than Ian's model. Although, having said that, the float model, if you went from feeling to just focusing on the action, you know, you could speed that up. What do you reckon, Ian? You know,
I'm not
because
sure I understand specifically what you're saying.
with your float model, I made a note. So it's float, label, observe, accept, and take action. If you feel something and you think, oh, this isn't good, and you can even sort of whiz over to the taking action and just take the bloody action anyway, and then everything else fill in as you're taking the action. Because I think, you know, action is what creates the change.
Yeah.
So you could, depending on
think so,
how
yeah.
you could potentially just jump straight over to that. So I'm thinking if you focus on what you want, and this is where
Right.
you speak to someone, you know, if you focus on what you want, even though it doesn't seem like a possible reality for you right now,
Yeah.
but you start, you're more likely to take those little bits of action to start making it more possible. But if you're just here thinking, oh God, I'm never going to be able to do that, you know, it all starts up here. So
Exactly.
Like they say, you don't always need to know every step
no,
or you
That-
start doing something.
no.
Sometimes stuff will just figure itself out along the way.
Absolutely.
A lot of the time, you know, it happens a lot. Sorry, Ian, go.
I think final thing I'll kind of say on this is obviously those models are great to use, but you're not likely to have those in front of you in a certain situation at a certain time. So I think what is also kind of good practice is to sit down with those models and just reflect over certain periods where you've come across a situation in your past and gone, right, okay, so what did I think in that moment? What was I thinking in my head at that moment? What was I feeling? What was the emotions that I was going through? And then ask yourself, what do I want to be thinking in that moment? And just take yourself through those individual tools, because like I say, it's not as if I carry that kind of chart around with me and write things down as and when I'm in certain situations, you know. So I don't think anyone will. So it's just a reflection type thing to go through.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I also think there's one thing I'd sort of interject, because something happened to me in the job that I do now when I was 6 weeks in, and similar situation to Ian, although not in a meeting, not being shouted at, but with a client realizing they wanted to change something and I actually didn't know the forms to fill in to change it. Now, I got through it. I didn't do the forms with them at that time. I said to them, I need to cancel one thing, do a new thing. I need to do new forms. So would they be kind enough to come back in? Which was fine. When they left, I had a complete and utter meltdown. Because all I kept saying to myself, like Ian, why the hell don't you know? You know, why don't you know which forms? What on earth's the matter with you? Ended up in tears. I was 6 weeks in a job that requires legal forms to be filled in absolutely to the letter. Otherwise, I potentially stop a funeral going ahead. And at 6 weeks in, I'm expecting myself to know all this, never having done the job before. And that, for me, is perfectionism. Because I want to do everything perfectly. So perfectionism also actually creates a stuck mindset and not so much of a growth mindset. Perfectionism can be positive. We know that. We've talked about it from the past, but it can actually also give you that stuck mindset that you have to do everything perfectly first time. That's not a growth mindset. So just to be aware of that perfectionism creeping in to that situation with your fixed mindset and your growth mindset. And I mean the negative perfectionism. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's a wrap for tonight, because I think we've given listeners a lot to take in and a lot to think about there. And like Ian said, actually, the great thing about Ian's is that you won't maybe have those with you. But if you are in a situation that plays on your mind, because that's often what happens, I'm sure Ian's situation did, I know mine did, going away, using that chart to analyse that situation, to come out with an action that's much more positive than's been going around your head. That's a growth mindset, isn't it? That's growing your mindset, which is what growth mindset means. So thank you so much for both of your inputs. Fabulous as ever. I hope listeners have got something to take away and really sort of think about your mindsets, the growth mindset, which is the easy part to start with, so you can start seeing changes in your mindset. And where might you need to work a little bit harder to get that growth mindset, and why might that be? So I'm going to wrap it up now.
I will say,
yeah.
sorry, quickly before we sign off.
Yeah, go for it.
So next week's episode is going to be a guest interview with Emma Jane Sanford, and she offers so much value. So I sat down with Emma and we had a great conversation. She offers a lot of value to help people. So make sure you tune in to next week's episode.
Absolutely. Sounds fabulous. No, Ian, I'm glad you did, because I wasn't sure what was coming up. So absolutely fabulous. And thank you all for listening. Don't forget, every Tuesday is when we release our new episodes, and you don't want to miss them. And please remember to follow us and like us so that we get shown to more people.
Yeah.
That's a very good point.
Very much.
We never say that, do we? We should.
We don't, do we?
Okay. So
Right.
we're going to close up now. So
Until next time, be there.
Be there.
And be naked.
Hit the music.